How do you forgive yourself for abandoning someone who never stopped waiting for you? Rick Campbell had built an empire out of cold logic and tight control, but nothing, not mergers, not headlines, not even the woman who shared his bed, had ever cracked him open the way a quiet little girl with his mother's eyes did. That question wasn't just rhetorical, it was a wound. And tonight, as he stood in his daughter's room holding a bundle of letters from the woman he had once loved and forgotten, that wound was bleeding. He hadn't planned to be a father. He hadn't even planned to look back. But now, in the wreckage of secrets and silence, Rick was faced with a choice: protect his name or protect the child who still believed in him. And believe it or not, she wasn't the only one he'd failed. Stay with this story, because in just a moment, everything Rick thought was unshakable will begin to collapse. And in the ashes, something utterly unexpected will rise. Something that might just change the way you see forgiveness, family, and what it truly means to come home. The boardroom of Campbell Biomedical Systems was silent, save for the crisp voice of its founder. Richard "Rick" Campbell stood at the head of the gleaming oak table, delivering what was meant to be a triumphant announcement. The company's newest merger, his most ambitious yet, would position them at the forefront of global medical innovation. This acquisition, Rick declared, isn't just business. It's legacy. It's securing our place in history. Applause thundered from the board members. Rick allowed himself a rare smile. At 53, he was everything people wrote about: self-made, brilliant, relentless. A working-class boy from Leeds turned billionaire, now commanding the loyalty of London's most powerful minds. Behind him was a glittering life, a penthouse overlooking Hyde Park, invitations to royal charity galas, and Clara, his poised, philanthropic wife. He had built walls of control and success so thick nothing could penetrate, until the door burst open. At first, no one moved, then whispers. A girl no older than 7 stood quietly at the threshold, wearing a faded green dress and holding a worn backpack to her chest. Her dark hair was tied in a ponytail, and her eyes scanned the room with unnerving calm. When they landed on Rick, the air shifted. Rick's assistant Jake sprang up. "Excuse me, young lady, this is a private meeting. I need to speak to Mr. Campbell," the girl said firmly. Rick frowned, already annoyed. "Sweetheart, if you're selling something, security will help you on the way out." "I'm not selling anything." She stepped forward, chin high, backpack tight in her arms. "My name is Sophie Blake. My mom's name was Emily Blake. It was the name that broke him." Rick's breath caught as the world around him seemed to blur. That name hadn't passed through his ears in nearly a decade. Not since before the IPO, before Clara, before the empire. Emily. She died 3 months ago. Sophie continued, her voice flat, but her eyes brimming. "Before she passed, she told me something. She told me, 'You're my father.'" The boardroom went silent. Rick felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him, but he couldn't look away from the girl, from the face that, now that he really saw it, felt hauntingly familiar. Her jaw, her eyes, the shape of her mouth, a mirror of someone he used to know, someone he had left behind. Rick stood frozen, one hand gripping the table. That's not possible." Sophie didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out a photograph, old, creased with curled edges. It was Rick and Emily sitting outside a cafe in East London. He remembered that day vividly, her laugh, the way she scribbled study notes on the napkin, the moment she leaned her head on his shoulder. He hadn't even known the photo existed. "She kept all your letters," Sophie added, "the ones you never replied to." So, Russo at the post office helped her copy them just in case. A wave of nausea hit Rick. He'd never opened those letters. He remembered vaguely telling his old assistant to filter personal correspondence during the company's rapid expansion. He'd buried the past, thinking he was protecting his future. Security began to approach, but Rick raised a hand. "Stop!" His voice was quieter now, the certainty drained. "How did you get in here?" Agnes helped me. "She's my mom's friend from her cancer support group. She worked at St. Helena Hospital and knows how to get around security. She's waiting downstairs." A murmur spread through the room, but Rick barely heard it. His heart pounded as Sophie took one step closer. "She said you wouldn't want to see me, but she made me promise. She said I had to try." "Before they take me away." "Take you away?" one of the board members asked, unable to stay silent. "The lady from Child Services came yesterday. Since Aunt Julia moved to Spain and Agnes is too old, I have to go into foster care on Monday." The room was still. Rick looked into Sophie's eyes and saw no manipulation, no performance. Just a child's desperation wrapped in stubborn dignity. A little girl standing in front of a man who had everything and yet may have abandoned the one thing that mattered most. "Mr. Campbell," Jake murmured near his shoulder. "Shall I clear the room?" Rick hesitated. Then Sophie spoke again. "Mom said you wouldn't believe me, that you'd want proof." She stepped forward, lifted her sleeve, and reached into her backpack once more. "But she also said you have a birthmark on your shoulder, shaped like Florida." Time stopped. That birthmark. Rick's mother used to joke it looked like a fishhook. No one except someone who had truly known him intimately would know that. "Everyone out," Rick said quietly. The boardroom emptied in seconds. Now alone, Rick sat down slowly as if afraid his legs would give out. Sophie stood across from him, calm and unreadable. The CEO, the little girl, two strangers, and something unspoken hanging between them that neither could escape. Rick finally asked, "Why now? She promised she'd take me to you when she got too sick." "I waited. I didn't want to. But when she died, I didn't want to disappear. I didn't want to be forgotten." Rick swallowed hard, struggling to stay composed. He had prepared for every business scenario, hostile takeovers, media leaks, market crashes. But this was a reckoning. And worse, he felt the first cracks of his carefully built life begin to split. He rose and crossed to the window, looking out over the Thames, the skyline, the empire he had built. Then he turned, suddenly unsure of everything he thought he wanted. "How old are you, 7? And what do you want from me?" "Sophie." Her answer came without hesitation. "I want you to remember me." Rick closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. "And you? What would you have done in Rick's place? If you were faced with a stranger who might be your child standing in the ruins of your past, what would your next move be? Let us know in the comments, and if this story touches you even a little, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Rick Campbell barely slept that night. The photo Sophie left behind lay on his desk like a ghost. He must have stared at it for hours. There he was, decades younger, arms slung over Emily's shoulders, both of them laughing back when life was simpler, back before ambition demanded sacrifices, before he chose the company over everything else. That morning he sat at the breakfast table in his Kensington penthouse, untouched coffee, going cold. Clara entered dressed in silk, ready for a foundation luncheon. She took one look at her husband's pale face and paused. "You're not going in today?" she asked. "No," Rick said. "I need you to come home early." "Why, what's happened? I'll explain everything." "When you get back." He couldn't meet her eyes. Clara hesitated, confused, but nodded. "All right, I'll cancel the gala prep meeting." By noon, Sophie was there. Jake had personally brought her and Agnes Miller, her guardian for the last 3 months, to the penthouse. The moment the door opened, Rick felt the atmosphere shift. It wasn't just the child standing at his door. It was his past, his failure, and the deep ache of something he wasn't ready to face. Clara walked in just as Sophie stepped into the living room. "Clara," Rick said gently, standing. "This is Sophie, and this is Mrs. Agnes Miller." Clara extended her hand automatically, ever the polished hostess. "It's lovely to meet you. I'm not sure I understand what's going on." Sophie spoke, eyes steady. "I'm Rick's daughter." Clara turned to her husband slowly, as if waiting for a punchline. But none came. Her gaze sharpened. "Rick, it's true. At least, it might be. Emily Blake. Sophie's mother, we were together before I met you." Clara's face remained composed, but her knuckles whitened as she clasped her hands. "You never mentioned her." "There was nothing to mention," Rick said quietly. "At least that's what I told myself." Agnes stepped forward. "Emily was part of my cancer support group. She passed 3 months ago. Before she died, she made me promise I'd bring Sophie to him. She said he had the right to know." "Why now?" Clara asked, her voice brittle. "Because if we hadn't," Agnes said gently, "Sophie would be in foster care by Monday." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Clara blinked. "Foster care?" Rick nodded. "She has no other family. Her cousin's in Spain. Agnes isn't legally eligible." Clara sank into the couch, staring at the girl. And you believe this? There's a photo, Rick replied, handing over the image. And letters. Dozens. She sent them. I never read them. Jake, who had remained in the background, cleared his throat. Rick, I have something to confess. Rick turned wary. What is it? 4 years ago, one of the letters had a photo. Sophie's 3rd birthday. I put it on your desk with the morning briefing. You looked at it and told me to file it away. Rick closed his eyes, guilt slamming into him like a train. I didn't know what to do, Jake added quietly, but I couldn't forget. So every year I sent a $75 gift card to the return address from my own account. Rick opened his eyes, stunned. Agnes nodded. Emily never used them. She kept them in a box. She said they meant he hadn't forgotten, just that he wasn't ready. The silence stretched. Clara's voice finally broke it. Have you taken a DNA test tomorrow morning? Rick said. It's scheduled, but I already know. Sophie sat quietly as if understanding this was a test she couldn't fail, and the only grade that mattered was his reaction. Then without warning, the intercom buzzed. Jake answered, then turned toward Rick. Sir, it's the press. Someone leaked what happened yesterday. Clara stood. Already they're camped outside the building. Twitter is trending with billionaire love child. They don't have names yet, but it's only a matter of time. Rick looked at Sophie. Her small hands tightened around her backpack. You're not going back, Rick said suddenly. You're staying here. Clara turned to him, startled. You're making this decision now. She's my daughter, Clara. She might be. And what about us? What about everything we've built? Rick's voice dropped. If we built something real, it won't fall because of a little girl. Clara said nothing. That night the phone rang. It was Ms. Greenfield from Child Services. I've heard the rumors, she said. I need clarity. Are you stepping forward as next of kin? Yes, Rick said. There will be background checks, parenting classes, supervised visits. This isn't a formality, Mr. Campbell. I'm aware. And your wife? She's adjusting. You need to act fast. If this drags out, the girl goes into state care until the legal process plays out. I'll make sure it doesn't, Rick promised. The next morning, Sophie sat on the edge of Rick's leather office chair, feet not touching the floor, watching the sun rise over London. Do you like tea or coffee? He asked awkwardly, holding a tray with both. Hot chocolate, she said with a small smile. I'll get some, Rick replied, then paused. I don't know what I'm doing, Sophie. I've never been anyone's father. She shrugged. I've never been anyone's daughter who had a dad. Rick looked at her, the simplicity of the exchange breaking him. Can I show you something, she asked, pulling a bundle of letters tied in blue ribbon from her backpack. These are from Mom. Some to you, some to me, for when I'm older. Rick took them gently as if they might shatter in his hands. Just then Clara entered. She had barely slept and it showed, but something in her posture had softened. Agnes is resting. I made breakfast, she said. Rick stood unsure. Then Clara looked at Sophie. Would you like to help me make pancakes? Sophie lit up. With blueberries if we have any, Clara replied. Rick watched the two of them disappear into the kitchen, and something shifted inside him. He wasn't sure what this was yet, a storm, a blessing, maybe both. But for the first time in years, he felt something like hope. And then his phone buzzed again. A message from the chairman of the board emergency meeting. Tomorrow. Be prepared. He looked back at the kitchen, hearing laughter, Sophie's light and full of life. Clara's reserved but real. The cost of his silence had just come due, and this time he wasn't sure if he could pay without losing everything. And you, what would you do if you were Rick, forced to choose between the reputation you built and the daughter you never knew you had? Tell us in the comments, and if this part moved you, please like the video and share it with someone who believes people can change. The boardroom was cold, not physically but emotionally. A room that once echoed with triumphs and billion-pound deals now buzzed with suspicion and silent judgment. Rick stood at the head of the table again, but this time there was no applause. The chairman of Campbell Biomedical Systems broke the silence. This is a PR nightmare, Richard. The merger is at risk, investors are rattled, and now you've invited the press into your personal life. Rick didn't flinch. This isn't a press stunt, it's the truth. And whether or not it's convenient for business, I won't pretend my daughter doesn't exist. Someone scoffed quietly. She's a child, Rick continued. One who lost her mother to cancer, one who nearly got swept into the foster system because I wasn't paying attention to what mattered. And yes, I made mistakes, but bearing her now to save face would be the worst one yet. There was a pause longer than Rick anticipated. Then the chairman leaned back in his chair. You'll need a formal statement. Transparent. Controlled. You'll meet with PR this afternoon. I've already written it, Rick said, sliding a folder across the table. That afternoon, with Clara by his side and Sophie tucked safely in the guest room upstairs, Rick released the truth to the world, the letters, the DNA tests, the admission of neglect, and a public commitment to raise his daughter with the integrity he wished he'd shown years ago. The internet exploded. Some called him selfish, some called him brave, but most just stared in stunned silence at the image of the usually unshakable billionaire kneeling next to a little girl holding a faded photograph of her mother. That same week, Ms. Greenfield, the social worker, returned to their home for her final visit before recommending temporary custody. Sophie had adjusted well. Clara had shown extraordinary warmth, and Rick, the man once known for avoiding anything outside of quarterly reports, had begun attending parenting classes, sat in on every therapy session, and even learned how to braid Sophie's hair clumsily but proudly. One evening, Clara called Rick into Sophie's room. She was sitting cross-legged on her new green bedspread, sorting through a wooden box filled with small treasures, a nurse's badge, 2 movie ticket stubs, a pressed daisy, and a collection of letters. Emily's memory box. Sophie had finally been ready to open it. She wrote letters for my future, Sophie whispered. One for each birthday, one for my graduation, one for my wedding. Rick knelt beside her, throat tight. Clara sat on the other side, tears shimmering in her eyes. Do you want to read one together? Clara asked gently. Sophie nodded and picked the letter labeled, For When You Meet Him. Rick unfolded it slowly. If you're reading this, it means I was wrong and I'm glad. I thought he wouldn't want you. I was afraid. But you deserve to know your father. You deserve a family that sees you, truly sees you. And Rick, if you're reading this, thank you for finally being ready. He folded the paper and pressed it to his chest. She was always kinder than I deserved. Sophie leaned against him. She never stopped loving you. Later that week, Rick made another decision, one that surprised even Clara. He bought back Emily's old apartment building in East London, restored the local bakery Mrs. Russo once owned, and converted the top 2 floors into subsidized housing for single parents with terminal illness. He named it the Blake House. When asked by reporters if this was damage control, Rick replied, no. It's what I should have done when she was alive. The months passed. Sophie started at St. Ainsley's Academy. She made 2 close friends, joined the science club, and beat most of her classmates at mental math. She still missed her mom. Sometimes she'd cry late at night, and Rick or Clara would sit with her until she drifted off again. But the sadness, though real, became part of something deeper, not just grief but growth. And then one spring morning, everything changed again. Rick stood in the nursery watching Clara lay their newborn son Oliver in the crib beside Sophie's drawing of a rocket ship taped to the wall. The baby stirred, made a face, and sighed contentedly. Clara smiled at Rick. She's been asking if she can help change his diaper. Rick chuckled. I'll gladly delegate. That evening, Sophie padded into the nursery in her space pajamas and peeked over the edge of the crib. He's really small, she whispered. So were you, Clara said. Sophie glanced at Rick. Is he going to call you Dad too? I hope so, Rick said. If I don't screw it up. Sophie smiled. You're doing better now. He leaned over and kissed her forehead. I'm learning from the best. The final thread of their past unraveled a month later at the opening of the Emily Blake Foundation for Families in Crisis. They held a small dedication in the garden of the Blake House, attended by residents, donors, and close friends. Sophie stood with Rick and Clara on the stage, holding the scissors to cut the ribbon. This isn't about guilt, Rick told the audience. It's about gratitude. My daughter didn't just give me a second chance. She gave me a life I never thought I'd be worthy of. The applause was soft, respectful, real. That night after the guests had gone, Clara poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Rick on the balcony. She'd be proud of you, she said. Rick looked through the glass doors into the living room where Sophie was teaching Oliver how to clap. I hope so. I hope she knows we're trying. She knew. That's why she sent Sophie. Rick turned toward Clara, reached for her hand, and said something he hadn't said in a long time. And this time he meant every word. I'm home. If you could give one message to someone you once left behind, what would it be? And what would you do if life handed you a second chance, one you never expected? What do you think about this story? If you truly felt something, comment no 3 below. If you think it was just okay, comment number 2. And if it didn't land for you, comment number 1. We'd still love to hear your thoughts. Also, where are you watching from? We're always thrilled to see this community grow across the world. Please tap that heart and share this story if it moved you. Someone out there may need to believe in redemption today.